Welcome, everyone. We have our dear friend Richard Wolfson back for another interview and another deep dive into Vedic science and the technologies of consciousness that are behind the healing process. So I'm so excited that you can join us for this talk and so excited to have Richard. If you didn't meet him on our first round, this is Richard Wolfson. He is a scholar and an academician. He's a Vedic scientist. Richard is a physicist. He's been interested and engaged with energy healing for a very long time. So he really sees what the energy healing field is about from several different angles. A very, very deep thinker and one of the smartest people I know. And I'm just so happy to have him here. He has put together an addendum to the previous slideshow, which goes into greater detail into the laws of nature that are responsible for the way consciousness emerges and the way the awakening process occurs from the angle of Vedic science. And I think you're going to find that the slides make this a very, very abstract topic, but I think you're going to find that his slideshow really helps make it easily accessible and concrete. Really. So, even for those of you who are not familiar with Vedic science or even the awakening process, I think you're going to find today's presentation really, really interesting. So, with that, I think, Richard, I will let you take it away and show us what you've got to share with us today.
Thank you, Dorothy, for letting me present this. What you're doing is wonderful, and I really appreciate all your work and all the people, the viewers who recognize the wonderful work you're doing. And I'll share this, and you can maybe add any points you want as we go along. So this is a summary synthesis and extension of this talk we gave from October called Mechanics of Creation and Manifestation. And at the bottom is a link to that initial presentation, but I'm sure we can put that below the video once, it's uploaded on YouTube.
Yeah, we'll put it in the description below the video for sure.
Okay, so this is the second talk today. Role of the Yoga Sutras, Kama Mimamsa Sutras, Brahma Sutras, and Six Upangas. So these are areas of the Vedic literature, and it should become much more clear as we go along. So there's going to be three parts of this presentation. The first part is called Yoga Nidra Manifestation and the five koshas. It's 4 slides. The second part is 7 slides, and the third part is 3 slides. So it's not that long a presentation, but it's got some deep thoughts in it. Okay, we're going to start with this section was on yoga. So we're going to start with the first 4 verses of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is, the founding book on yoga. And how this all began, this whole presentation, is when I went into this natural food store and there was a new woman working at the cash register, and she said her name was Atta. And I just backed away and thought, Atta, I know that word. And then I realized Atta is the first word of the Yoga Sutras. And I came home and I reflected on that. And then in the middle of the night, I woke up and I got, oh my God, it's like this whole insight blossomed from that one word, Atta. So
Wow.
Atta is the first word of the Yoga Sutras, which is the whole teaching on yoga. And Atta Yoga Nushasanam, now is the teaching on yoga. So the word Atta means now. And Mahesh Yogi has explained that the first word of any Vedic literature encapsulates the total knowledge of that area of the Vedic literature. So now that first word is the core teaching of yoga. The first word encapsulates the entire teaching. And this is what came to me. How does the now do that? Well, be in the now. Don't get caught up in random thoughts that drag you into an illusion of the past or the present, past to the future. Be in the present. Now is the only reality that exists. So this is the whole teaching on yoga, is to be in the now. And I'm taking a course on yoga, online who has sort of explained this, and there's these 8 limbs of yoga, and all of them are about one thing, just getting into the now, getting rid of all these random thoughts that drag you away from being in the now. So how do we get into the now? Well, the second verse of the Yoga Sutras, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, says yoga is the complete settling of the activity of the mind. So that the vrittis are these fluctuations of the mind, all these random thoughts that come and go. And we've got to settle all these random thoughts of the mind. And once we do that, we'll be in the present. Now, Maharishi translated this word complete settling, nirodha, as complete settling. I'm just pointing out other people translate this word as control. And Maharishi doesn't like the word control because it indicates there's some effort involved, and effort indicates concentration or something non-natural. So he says that complete settling, because you settle the mind and then, yeah, and then we'll be in that most settled state and be in the now. We don't want the mind to be out of control. I did some reflections on this. So we don't want the mind to be out of control. And then I kind of thought, well, what about a tranquilizer? That can settle the mind, but that obviously isn't yoga.
That also deadens the mind, right?
Yeah, that deadens
Makes
the
you
mind,
dull. Yeah.
makes you dull.
Yeah.
But it does settle the mind. But then I kind of thought, what are some more principles of yoga to help give insight on that? Well, ahimsa is a fundamental principle of yoga, non-harm. So we know tranquilizer wouldn't work because that causes harm. It deadens the mind. Another verse on yoga is from the Bhagavad Gita, Samatvam yoga uchite, balance of mind is called yoga. So, and a tranquilizer takes you out of balance. So a tranquilizer wouldn't work. So that's just an insight on the way. Now let's look at the third verse. So far, we know yoga is a complete settling of the mind. What happens once we settle the mind? Pada drishtu svarupe vastanam. Then the observer is established in himself or herself, so once we settle the mind, then we're in this self-referral consciousness. So that's great. That's where we wanted to be. So these first verses, so the word now encapsulates the whole thing, and then it just kind of unfolds to explain. Once we're in the now, we do that by settling all these random fluctuations, and then we're in self-referral consciousness. And Tom Agnes is the one who translated. The translation is from with Maharishi's guidance. And then the fourth verse says, is sort of an elaboration, vritti sarupyam itaratra. So once the observer is established in himself or herself, the reverberations of the self emerge from here, the self-referral state, remain within the self-referral state. So we remain within the self-referral state, and we're not caught up in these random fluctuations. Thoughts now emerge from cosmic need and no longer from past impressions and random fluctuations. We become an instrument of the divine. So that's the whole the first 4 verses. So
I'd like to interject something, Richard, which is that the inner landscape can be abstract for people. So they may find, well, how do I know the difference between a vritti, which is some fluctuation of my mind, and the reverberations of self? The vritti is blocking the flow of divine expression, whereas the reverberations of the divine are enhancing or supporting the flow of divine expression. And yet, subjectively, could they show up as similar? Is like, well, I close my eyes and my awareness starts to settle, and I've got all these fluctuations going on. How does a person know the difference between a vritti, which is their mind being sort of caught up in illusions of the past and future, versus a reverberation of the self? Because I notice the same word is used, right? In the fourth verse, vritti is used, and in the second verse, vritti is also used.
Yeah. Well, usually,
but it means two different things. It means two different things, right?
Well, it's the fluctuations of the. Yeah. Now the thing is, we kind of usually know if we're sitting here like worrying about the future or worrying about the past, and
Yeah.
that we have no awareness of our body or no awareness of anything. So self-aware, because it's kind of like people talk about the monkey mind. Our mind is always worrying what's going to happen, and we're thinking about some impression, maybe something happened yesterday and we can't let go of it. And it's just like holding on to us. Our mind is running around in circles, and then then we realize half an hour has gone by and we haven't gotten anything useful done. So if we're thinking about the past, things that happened in the past, or we're sort of worrying about the future, those are kind of like the random thoughts. But if we're focused on here, right now, what's in front of us, those are that then we're in the present, and that's where we want to be. So we want to usually what happens is, something happens in the past, it creates some trauma or some
Yeah. An impression. It
yeah,
creates an impression.
and then something happens in the present that reminds us of that impression. Like we meet
Right.
someone on the street and it reminds us of something he said to us a year ago that really bothered us, and then it's sort of like our back goes up as soon as we see him. We don't
Mm.
even hear what he says because we're kind of like, we're reverberating from the fear of what he did last time or
Could
something.
it also be that those types of thoughts come up during the purification process?
Yeah, and during the
Yeah, some
purification
purification.
process, yeah, sure, yeah, for
So here's another question. Why didn't they use the word richa in the fourth verse? Because aren't the richas the impulses of intelligence that are rising from the source of creation? Or do I have a misunderstanding of the meaning of that word?
well, the word richa, as I
I mean, not
understand
that
it,
who am I to question the Vedas, okay? But still, I'm just curious because that's the way I understood the difference between those two types of mental experiences.
well, you use richa that way, but I've kind of understand it more in terms of the verses of the Veda. The riches of the Veda are the verses of the Veda, and it's kind of like
Oh, yes, 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 yes,
so
yes.
that's my
Okay. The other thing that I'm thinking is like I know I'm splitting hairs, but and I know there's a lot of slides to get through, but I'm thinking we might, if this is very long, we might split it up, into sections. We might split them just when we upload it. But in any event,
yeah, well, yeah, I was thinking that too.
yeah,
But and again,
my thought is that the types of impressions that are a byproduct of past experiences of being out of alignment with natural law or purification coming up or something like that, those are experienced more at the superficial levels of the mind, right? Like in the mental and emotional body. You meet the man and you feel all kind of grouchy all over again or something like that, whereas the reverberations of the self, of divinity, of the will of God coming through the fabric of creation, this is experienced at a much deeper level of the self, right? It's experienced down at like like the noetic level of the physiology.
yeah, I think that's what like this fourth verse is. The reverberations, emerge from the self-referral state and remain
Mm-hmm.
within the self-referral state, and they're not clouded by the impressions on the surface.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
yeah.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, good. Just
Oh,
clearing that up. Yeah.
okay. So then the last point we added, the end point of the Yoga Sutras, which is the eternal state of now, is called Patanjali's Kaivalya. Silence is maintained in activity, and we're no longer kind of in this state of hyperexcitation where all these impressions are sort of causing all these random reverberations. So let's see. Now let's reflect a little more on the second verse of the Yoga Sutra, since Maharishi emphasized it so much and there was one or two points that came up. So the second verse, yoga is a complete settling of the activity of the mind. We need to settle the vrittis, the random thoughts that drag us into an illusion of the past and the future so we can be in the present, the now. How to do this? Oh, I have to move this box. Catching yourself whenever you get caught in random thoughts can be part of the process. I wanted to emphasize this point because yoga as it's traditionally thought about by many people, is just trying to catch yourself
Mm-hmm.
whenever you get into random thoughts. It's sort of like, and it's like impossible. Yogis can spend hundreds of lifetimes trying to catch themselves whenever they get caught in random thoughts, and it doesn't really get anywhere. So Maharshi has made the point that he devoted his life to explaining one needs to also practice like transcendental meditation, and meditation that provides the experience of pure being, transcendental consciousness, because that settles the mind, it releases all these stresses and things. So the point I want to make here is, just because Maharshi emphasized his whole life that this concept of just trying to catch yourself without transcending doesn't really get you anywhere. So
Right.
do not confuse the goal with the process. The goal is to get to the settled state of the mind, but the process of doing that isn't to just try and catch yourself. It's you have to, there's all these 8 limbs of yoga, and you need to be doing all of them, especially the meditation. All the other limbs of yoga, which is like proper diet and exercise, and or is transcending, are also important. All areas of life need to be brought into balance. And this is important also because some people think all they need to do is meditate, and they don't pay as attention as they can to their behavior. And they may, not have be very aware of the behavioral patterns, and they stay stuck in these routines and dogmas and all that. So we need to break out of those too. And I find the yoga nidra practice described in the earlier presentation particularly helpful. So I'm going to go through that here, but not in the same detail that we did in the first presentation. So let's review and extend the yoga nidra practice for realizing the now and realizing who we are, truly are an instrument of the divine. So yoga nidra for manifesting, healing, enlightenment, and world peace. So nidra means night. So yoga nidra is a yoga practice for the night, which is like for sleep. So if you wake up in the middle of the night, or even while we're going to bed at night, and we don't fall asleep, we can do this practice. And I find it's particularly, wonderful. But you can, if you fall asleep as soon as you start it, that's a success. So don't worry that you need to concentrate on it, because it looks kind of complicated. And it's derived from the first limb, which is called yama, of the 8 limbs of yoga, which of the Yoga Sutras. And another subtitle is Surrendering to the Divine, Becoming an Instrument of the Divine. So it's like surrendering to the now. Then you become an instrument of divine. And this presentation for me was doing that. It kind of came through me. And it's in stages of nivartatvam. This is a Sanskrit word which means go beyond where you are. So you start and you just keep surrendering and going to further and going beyond and going beyond. So it's stages of nivartatvam. So stage 1, the first part is these 5 yamas, and the yamas are the first of the 8 limbs of yoga, and it's got 5 parts. And we're going to go through them, and I'm trying not to be too slow so we don't take too long. So the first of these yamas is called the himsa, which is usually translated as non-violence, or non-harm, or and we can think of that gets fulfilled through the concept of unconditional love. So this, and I'm just going through my understanding. And in Dorothy's words, it's being in the lap of God. So unconditional love for the source, for the creator, that's the fulfillment, or that fulfills ahimsa. And we can put, like, if we go to bed at night, these are stages. So if we go to bed, we lie down, and we just feel that unconditional love for the creator, being in the lap of God. We can put our hands on our heart. And that's the first stage. And we may start that, and within 3 seconds, we're asleep. And if so, that's great. And this first stage of Nivartatvam is letting go, surrendering to love, offering all love to the divine. And optional, we can feel a ball of love and light around our heart if that helps us. So the second stage is, or the second part of the five yamas is satya, which is often translated as just truthfulness. Like people say ahimsa is like nonviolence, is like not standing on an ant or something. And satya is telling the truth. And those are just kind of like superficial understandings. Ahimsa is fulfilled through unconditional love. Satya is fulfilled by being in the now, because the state of now is the state of eternal truth. And we can fulfill that by being in the now, by feeling the body. So the first step is this unconditional love, being in the lap of God. While we're doing that, just feeling the body, being in the body. And that brings us into the present. Being in the body brings us into the present, brings us into the now, the state of Sat, eternal truth. And here we have surrender to Sat, the eternal now, surrender love and the body to the Creator.
Mm.
And we can let the ball of love expand to the whole body. Then the third of the yamas is called the steya, which is normally translated as non-stealing. And Maharishi explains, and the reference for Maharishi is on the bottom right. It's called a video, potentially in the 8 Limbs of Yoga, where he explains this. That these really are characteristics of unity consciousness. Asteya, that state of non-stealing, is the state of unity when you are everything. You're the whole universe, so there is nothing to steal. So in this particular, process of yoga nidra, so within that love, expand our awareness to the entire universe. So we are the entire universe. There's nothing to steal. So just surrender the separation of us to the universe. So in the second state, we were like having body awareness. We've just expanded that body awareness to universe awareness. And we're now embracing the entire universe, and we're surrendering love and the universe to the Creator. So that's the third step. And we can let the ball of love expand to the universe. Then those three are really the only things we have to do. Everything else is automatic. And I'm going to summarize them just because this is really the only thing we do. The 3 steps of surrendering to the divine, or to the Creator. First, we just surrender to love, which is the Creator. Then God is love. Then we surrender our body to love, the divine. Then we surrender universe to love, the divine. So and this seemed to me, these 3 steps seem to correspond. This sort of came to me a couple of days ago. Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. I thought, really? But that's what came, because
Oh yeah, I see it. I see that.
because Father was love is the Father, the value of the Father. God is the Father, is the value of love. Then the body is like the son of that. It's like the specific, is the expression, of the
He
divine.
came to earth and he became a man.
Yeah,
He was
and then
incarnated. He was incarnated of the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary and became man. He became human with a human body. Yeah.
And then and then at the end, like for any on this process of surrendering the universe, the divine, it's sort of let go of individual and become, the universal, the Holy Ghost. So these 3 together fought. So this was a wonderful aha experience. So those are the only 3 things we need to do from our side. Everything else is automatic. And the wholeness of this next stage, brahmacharya, or the next of the 5 yamas, is the wholeness of the 3 of these. Because Brahma means wholeness, Charya means seated in or established in. Some people translate the word brahmacharya as celibacy. That's sort of like the street sort of translation. Maharishi explains that all of these yamas are characteristics of unity consciousness, and they have a higher value. So here we are seated in the wholeness of the three, in this dynamic wholeness, and it corresponds to Saguna Brahm, which is the value of wholeness that has dynamism inherent with it, and it's called fullness of fullness. And incidentally, and I'll just repeat this point, if you want more details on this, go back to that earlier presentation with Dorothy and I, where there's much more details, because I don't want to take time to do that here. And this, we're surrendering parts to the whole. So that's this stage. So each stage is a stage of surrender. Then aparigraha is the fifth of the yamas, and it's usually translated as non-possession. It's sort of like, in the street, it'd be like giving all your possessions away. But it's not, on a deeper level, it's that state of witnessing, the state of silence. Like in the state of, just previous to that, we were the whole universe. Now we're giving away that, and we're just going to the state of silence. So we're not possessing the universe. We're that state of pure silence, witnessing everything, and that's nirguna Brahm without qualities, without activity, and it's that state of fullness of emptiness. So we've surrendered dynamism from state 4, or from brahmacharya, to silence. So we've surrendered dynamism to silence, and those are now the 5 yamas. We've gone through all 5 of the yamas. And then the next stage is very interesting. So at this point, up to aparigraha, we've got dynamism, fullness of fullness, and fullness of emptiness. So now, once of these two things, there can be a pulsating between them. And that's what we finished stage 1, which had these 5 parts. So stage 2 is Atma, which Maharishi says is self-fulfilled consciousness, the reverberations between infinite silence and infinite dynamism are fullness of fullness, fullness of emptiness. It's a pulsating. I put the word cradle here to remind me. Maharishi says when there's the story of Krishna in the rocking in his cradle, and Maharishi said what that indicates is the pulsation between silence and dynamism, or being and becoming. Because this is fullness of emptiness is like being, fullness of fullness is sort of like becoming. And this is self-referral consciousness, or the dynamic, self-interacting dynamics of consciousness. And now we're getting into something even more, we'll get something more interesting. So we've surrendered silence and dynamism to a separation. So there's like a duality kind of, and there's a pulsation back and forth. Now, in Vedic science, that finest hearing is the basis of, or is the, here's a chart up here. Finest hearing corresponds with space. Like there's 5 senses, and each of those 5 senses corresponds with one of the 5 building blocks of space. And the interesting thing is that Vedic science explains that subjectivity creates objectivity. So we first have the experience of finest hearing, and the finest object of perception creates space. So it's actually our subjectivity underlies objectivity. So in this particular case, the first of the 5 elements that has been created. So we just created the element of space as this reverberation, which is sort of like the quality of hearing. The finest sense of hearing was enlivened, was created as reverberations between these two, and the finest element or object of finest hearing is called space. We're creating, and there's another chart near the end where I'm going to go over this in more detail. And there's just so many fascinating things, and I tried to put them all in. I hope it's not too much. But anyhow, this quality of finest sense corresponds with the space element, which is the 5th chakra, which is the throat chakra. And that corresponds, there's like 5 layers of the body. And the next chart's going to go into that in more detail. 5 sheaths or layers of the body. Dorothy's, I think, talked about that a little bit. And this is the particular kosha, is Anandamaya kosh, is the layer of bliss. And we're going to go into all these in the next chart. But just so he's like, see these. So we're going through this process. We went down to the state of silence. Now, within that silence, we're finding all this structure, and this structure is creating creation. And this is a process of manifestation, yoga nidra for manifesting. So we're kind of like going in and we're going to manifest healing, enlightenment, and world peace. So it's going to be a 10-stage process. And this is like the first stage. So we've gotten down to silence, and now we're going through the part of manifesting. We might have had desire for world peace, happiness, healing. Somewhere up here, I had the word, oh, here is the word healing in state 2, because healing's going to be naturally occur. We might go, we feel the body at this stage, and we start feeling sensations. So we're getting from that state of eternal love, we're becoming an instrument of divine, and we're starting to do healing for ourselves and for the entire universe. And here's the first stage, where it's occurring on the level of space. So that was a long thing. So these are the stages of manifesting, engaging all the subtle senses in sequence, and we're becoming an instrument of the divine, to create heaven on earth and heal ourselves. So this is, and there's a quote from one of the areas of Vedic literature called Vasheshika, Shabda Guna Akash, which says that the quality of sound, vibration, motion is the quality of space. And Dr. E.C.G. Sudarshan was a famous physicist, and he had a talk with Maharishi where they talked about that. So Shabda Tan Mantra, which is the finest object of the sense of hearing, is the fundamental building block of space. Motion is inherent in space, and space is created from vibration, from motion. So this is a like reversal of the scientific paradigm, which thinks that, matter is fundamental and consciousness is secondary. This sort of says that matter is created from consciousness, and in this particular case, it's the sense of hearing that creates the building block of space. So subjectivity creates objectivity, and we're going to go through this in more detail in one of the later slides, but it's fascinating. Okay, so now that we've created the space element, the next stage is going to have to be the air element, because we're going to go through these in sequence. So at this point, at stage 2, we had 2 elements. We had silence and dynamism, and there was a reverberation back and forth between them. And if you want to know where this funny chart comes from, you can look at the earlier presentation with Dorothy and me. We go through this in detail. But this reverberation back and forth creates a kind of like friction. And friction creates fire or heat. And the first stage is going to be like a warmth. And again, this, just understand where this chart comes from, go back to the earlier presentation. So Agni is the word for fire. So friction creates Agni, creates fire. And the metabolism is ignited. And so at this point, we had surrender, silence, and dynamism, and the pulsation of finest hearing. Now, at this point, we're surrendering finest hearing to finest touch. So this is like a warmth. And sparsha is that finest touch. It's like a kindling of the heart. And we'll see and this underlies the heart intuition connection. So up here we see sparsha, enliven. So this is the finest touch, finest feeling, which is like intuition. And the kosha, it's like vijnaya, vijnamaya, kosha. So that's the layer of intuition, like in the brain. Then this is the air element. Then this is the heart. So this is finest feeling is the heart. and it's the layer of cognition. So, and this is and at that layer, we've enlivened the air element. Okay, now after the air element, we've got to get to the fire element, and then we've got the water and earth elements. They'll be the next stage. And we'll go through this relatively quickly. I'm not going to explain this chart because that's in the other thing. So this next stage is we're enlivening the fire element, and this is called Pachetna, the eightfold Prakriti. There's like 10 spokes coming out, and these correspond to the 10 mandalas or chapters of Rig Veda. It also corresponds to Devi Veena, which is the musical instrument of Mother Divine, whose sounds give rise to the entire creation. So at the previous stage, there was just like a warmth. Now that has sprouted. So this is like the sprouted seed that's going to give rise to the entire creation. And the Veda, lots of nature are now enlivened. And so we surrendered the finest touch from the previous stage to finest sight, rupa. And this corresponds to the brain gut connection, because fire is like the metabolism and of the, digestion, and the mind emotions are the layer of the koshas, manomaya kosha, the layer of mind emotions. So that's the layer of the mind gut connection. And then this is the last um, of these stages, and this is stage 5, and this is material creation. And this chart, again, is explained in that other presentation. This is the layer of physical manifestation. On the right are the dhatus, which are the tissues of the body. On the left are sort of like the tissues of the universe, the planets and galaxies and stars and all that. So we've surrendered at this stage finest sight to finest taste and smell, called rasa and gandha. And at the bottom here, we sort of see we've enlivened the water element and the earth element. So this is the most concrete element. So we've created the universe at this stage. So this is physical manifestation. So and just going back, this is all happening automatically during our yoga nidra practice, just to bring us down to earth. This is like the manifestation. We're becoming an instrument for manifesting the will of the divine. This is all, you don't have to intellectually understand this. All you need to do is these first 3 steps, which we went through, and over time, everything else is going to happen. And I'll just summarize or remind you, if you do these first 3 steps, over time, you'll feel this wholeness, this brahmacharya, the seated in wholeness. It just happened to me. I was just doing these first 3 steps, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, this wholeness is developing. That's where the brahmacharya is. Then after that, after a certain while, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm witnessing the silence has developed. So it's sort of like you do the first 3, and just over time, you start to experience the other ones. Then the final stage 6 here is just the synthesis. So this is like the synthesis, where we surrender the parts of the whole. So down here, this parts the whole we had 3 parts, and this is the wholeness of the 3. Up here, we've got a wholeness of the whole cycle, parts the whole, and it's one ocean of love and motion. It's sort of how I, feel about this or understand this. One ocean of love and motion. So like this whole thing is, surrendering to love, and that leads to everything else. And now we just do a reflection on this. There are 5 steps of surrendering activity to silence down to here, to silence. And then there were 4 more steps of serving activity within silence, all these unmanifest senses, which created creation, followed by 1 more step of synthesis at the top. So 5 steps down, 5 steps out. This procedure is based on the 5 yamas constitutes a yoga nidra, practice for the night or sleep. And all steps are in the lap of God, surrendering to the divine within and becoming an instrument of the divine. So that's this whole process. And then that I want to emphasize. Be easy about it. Don't try and intellectualize it because you're probably going to fall asleep most of the time after you go through step 1 or 2. So falling asleep or peace at any stage or losing time is success. So don't get fixated about the details. And the summary of the whole process is just be love and let that love expand. That's what the whole thing is about. It's very simple. Okay, so on the next chart, so this is the most complicated chart on the whole thing because you're thinking, oh my God, are they all going to be that complicated? No, that was the most complicated from now. The next one's simpler, then after that it'll get even simpler. So the next chart is going to be reflection on the 5 koshas, which are like these 5 layers of the body that we talked about. The 5 mantras, which are like the subtle elements, hearing, touch, sight, taste, and smell, and the 5 chakras, just because they came up in the previous slide. So let's look at them. So here we've got the 5 koshas, which are like these 5 sheaths, and they're layers. People talk about them as layers of the body, but I think this first point is the word body creates a misconception of some sort of localization. So like the skin or something is like a layer. We think of it as a layer, but it's not a layer like that has a particular border to it. Each layer or kosha is a non-localized field like a cloud with its own currents that permeate and flow within every other kosha. And each has its own center, which is like a chakra. So these are like all coexist on top of each other, but they're different like layers. They're different layers of flow. So chakra 1, you just see this thing lit up where it says physical body. So that's called Annamaya kosha. So that corresponds to chakra 1. The root chakra, which is the earth element. Annamaya kosha is the flow of food and material nutrients in the body. So that's that. And this is where I got that chart from, incidentally. Then chakra 2 is called the energy body, pranamaya kosha, and it corresponds with the sacral chakra, which relates to water, fertility, reproductive instincts, and also pranamaya kosha is the flow of energy, vitality, the layers of prana, and this carried by matter, like in the nadis, in the channels of the body, like acupuncture talks about them as the meridians, but they're sort of like carried throughout the body by the prana. The flow of energy is carried, and it's carried by the matter and the nadis, the flow of energy. And this is different from the air element. I'm sort of making a point because people think of prana as air, and that's something we're going to get to. This is the energy body. Chakra 3 is the emotional body, and this relates to the solar plexus chakra, the fire element, and digestion. And it's manomaya kosha, the flow of thoughts and emotions. So this is the layer of the gut-brain connection because it's the fire element. It's corresponds actually to the digestion, the fire in the digestion, also thoughts and emotions. So that's where you get the gut-brain connection. And this is carried by the prana because we know that the prana carries emotions, but also molecules such as, neurochemicals and hormones and neurotransmitters. So I just want to add that.
I'd like to add something too, because we often think of our hearts as like the emotional center of the body, but the administration of feelings is very much carried out by those fiery elements. And if we think for example, that the kidneys are down in that area of the solar plexus area of the body, and the kidneys are the adrenal glands right on top of the kidneys are the producers of adrenaline, and like that's one of the main neurochemicals produced that gives rise to very specific levels of emotional experience. I think the emotions that we experience in the heart are much more subtle a lot of times, that we experience the really fine, really refined feelings and the more delicate feelings more in the heart. But in the solar plexus, it's more like applied, you could say applied emotions, and the energy and the strength and the vitality to respond emotionally. That's all.
That's good. Yeah, because like chakra three here is more like those superficial thoughts and emotions, where the
Right,
heart is deeper. It's like intuition, wisdom. It's like those deep knowingness, cognition. So,
right.
so the wisdom body, the heart is associated with the wisdom body, the air element, nyaya, maya, kosha, the flow of wisdom, cognition. And this is the layer of the heart intuition connection. This is much deeper than those sort of like, emotion, day-to-day emotions, which are the third chakra. And this is carried by the fine feelings and much deeper. Then chakra five, which is the throat chakra and the air element, um, Anandamaya kosha, which is the flow of bliss, of soma, divine love, joy, peace, harmony, interconnectedness, permeating all layers and the entire creation. I found that this is kind of like fascinating. Like the throat is the deepest of all of them. And it's like,
Well, I also like it because this is the area where all of that, when it's balanced and healthy intelligence rising up through the body, maintains its expression, or it's created. All we create through our hands, through our voice, and that goes out into the entire creation. So I love that that's the connection to the whole universe right there. That
yeah,
makes so much sense, right? Because that's how we connect with the universe, is through our hands and our voices, and it's right up there in the throat.
yeah, and that's where like the cognition of the Veda comes in. And this is
Right.
Maharshi made this. This is a quote of Maharshi. The reverberations of that empty hollowness of the throat is a connecting link between the enormous cosmic dynamism of the cosmos, of the universe, and the inner silence of the individual, the inner faintest impulse, the first. So creativity of the entire universe happens in the throat, because that's where the Veda comes from in terms of on the level of our individual physiology.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And also the thyroid is in the throat, and the thyroid holds this position of being like a prophet for the body, because it sees the food pass through that hollow space, and it knows what the body needs to produce in the way of enzymes and hormones and other metabolic materials to metabolize specific foods. So the thyroid then sends messages to the whole rest of the body, telling it what to produce in order to navigate successfully the material creation. And I think that's interesting that that's there also, is like there's that organ that sees, that knows what's coming in the future, because it's the seed of creation, right? So within the seed is all the information of the whole creation.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, I'm happy. It's like fascinating to sort of realize that I was going to, you know, that like these koshas, they don't include the brain and all that, but they include everything, because like the heart really is a deeper level, and then the throat and that. But anyhow, that ends part one, yoga nidra, manifestation, the five koshas. So the next, and we could even split this in two parts starting here. If we want.
Yeah, Richard, I was thinking this would be nice to upload just each section, because
Yeah,
it's a lot of information,
yeah.
and we
Now,
don't want to overwhelm people. We want to make it should be easy for people to absorb.
yeah, that's
I
why I
mean,
split it into
even,
three parts.
yeah,
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 very
that's
different.
so smart. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so now we can do part two, and this is like a whole other universe. It's interesting. The six upangas, which are called the six systems of Indian philosophy, and yoga is one of these six systems, including the yoga is the fourth one. The fifth one is karma mimamsa, and the sixth one is Vedanta, and there's 7 slides in this section. I put these in just so people realize, it's finite. It's not good. All right. So now we're going to go over the six systems. They're called the six upangas, called the six systems of Indian philosophy. Sometimes they're called the six darshanas, which means the six cognitions, six means of gaining knowledge. In order, they're Nyaya, Visheshka, Sankhya, Yoga, karma, mimamsa, and Vedanta, and we're going to just give an overview in this chart of them, and then we're going a little more detail into two of them. So these first three, Nyaya, Visheshka, and Sankhya, are concerned primarily with knowledge and waking state. So Nyaya means justice or ethics or logic, and it's a way of, there's criterion there for setting whether knowledge is valid or not. So if someone just invents something out of a dream, it's not valid knowledge. Like, and justice fits in here because if you're going into a courtroom, you want to make sure that any decision they make is made according to some valid decision. It's not just, someone's
Evidence. You want real evidence.
evidence.
Yeah.
And we're going to go through the I think 5 means of knowing that evidence is valid later with Nyaya. So like, yeah, it's valid evidence. Vaisheshika is concerned with perception, like phenomenology. Like if I wanted to tell the difference between, a glass of water and a pen, they have different shapes and different colors, or between Dorothy and Tom, they have, just way to tell difference between things. So it's distinguishing qualities. Sankhya has to do with analyzing all the different layers of an object, and we'll see a chart on that. There's like, the senses, the 5 elements, all these different layers, and there's 25 of them. But those have to do with like waking state functions mainly. Then yoga is for developing silence and activity. And that state, as we mentioned before, is called Patanjali's Kaivalya, that state of the now. We're in that state of silence, and we're not overwhelmed by all these random thoughts. Then karma mimamsa is like all of the universe comes out of that silence. So karma mimamsa is looking, or is able to locate the creativity, the activity within that silence. And JK here means Jaimini's Kaivalya, because I didn't have room to write that in. So Jaimini is the seer who cognized karma mimamsa. So he saw the dynamism with or structure within the silence and how the whole universe comes out from it. Then Vedanta, and the corresponding area of the Vedic literature is also called the Brahma Sutras, unifies the silence and the dynamism from yoga and karma mimamsa. Now we'll look a little more. And how does this relate to Marshi's 7 states of consciousness? Well, it doesn't relate perfectly, and Marshi made that clear. And also there's variations in experience in higher states of consciousness. People experience it in different orders and different sequence. So, but anyhow, he said we can sort of identify yoga with cosmic consciousness and witnessing, because at Kaivalya, Tantri's Kaivalya, that's silence and activity. But there's variations in terms of, some people, their stresses go at this stage. Sometimes they actually stay to later stages. There's levels of experience and supernormal abilities. Some people, it's different. Karma mimamsa we can associate with God consciousness or fine perception. But some people like pass right through God consciousness, kind of like quick, and don't really experience until God realization until later. And I put this reference because I can talk about, give these references later of like people who've talked about their experiences and how it varies so much from person to person. And unity consciousness is associated with Vedanta, where everything is seen in the self. There's like Brahman consciousness, and there's different abilities that come and go in it, and levels of bliss. And it just varies. Some people experience God at this level, some people at that level. So I wanted to put that in there, but not to take it too seriously because it varies so much. And I think that's why Maharshi didn't emphasize that, because he said we can look at this way, but it's not exactly like that. So
I also think there's another pitfall that sometimes when people are thinking about those levels of consciousness in such a concrete manner, they can fall into the pattern of comparing and contrasting their experience with the experience of others. And it seems from my perspective that because the whole thing comes down to the individual experience relationship with God, that it's unique for everyone, and you really can't compare your experiences to the next person's experiences. The system doesn't really work that way. And I really grateful that you brought out this point, that the way individual people experience the development of consciousness is different. It's very unique from one to the next.
Yeah, and it's really appreciated to have a teacher like Dorothy who can guide you if you're having some confusion, or other people that it's because it's someone who's gone through this, because you could be totally confused. I expected it to unfold this way, and instead I'm experiencing this, and they may have gone through the same thing. So,
Yeah.
so anyhow, out of these six, we've only looked at yoga so far in detail. So now we're going to consider karma mimamsa. Karma means action. Mimamsa means analysis. So it's analysis. So karma mimamsa means analysis of the unmanifested action or structure that underlies creation. And this is, I said JK over here, is James Cavalier. And in physics, I just put it like BHS means black hole singularity, because it's like a parallel. Initially, black holes were thought to be like an end of the completely flat. It's like a cemetery. Once things are there, nothing happens, like the cemetery of the universe. But in reality, later, Stephen Hawking showed that there's dynamism inherent within a black hole, and universes can actually come out of a black hole. Another concept in physics is zero-point motion, where there's like dynamism available at every point in space, and they're trying to use that for zero-point motion machines, perpetual motion machines. And apparently that's how certain things are being run, but we'll see that over the years. But that was that. So now we're going to look at the Kamimanta Sutras of Maharishi Jaimini. And this is actually one of the most exciting things for me, this particular insight. And it came through Yoga Nidra. That's why I like Yoga Nidra so much. I'm sort of wondering something. I go to bed, I start doing practice in the morning, then in the middle of the night, all of a sudden some insight will just sort of come. So the Yoga Nidra is learning how to surrender. Once you surrender, all knowledge is available to you. And it'll just kind of like come. You just have to let go. And it's like, where did that come from? But anyhow, so this interpretation, translation of yoga, Kamimanta Sutra,
Can
is
I just put one thing in there?
completely unique.
Through
Yeah.
the because I know we've got people from lots of different backgrounds listening, but through the Christian system, this is where the principle of humility comes in. You know, that place of being completely balanced within oneself, not excess of arrogance and narcissism, and not an excess of self, not liking oneself, but just in that state of simple self-awareness. And that's the surrender to the divine. And
That's
that's the state that the great saints and the great fathers of that tradition have encouraged for centuries upon centuries, to be able to establish a close and intimate relationship with God. That's all.
that's great. Yeah. That's like that state of simplicity,
Yeah.
no arrogance in it. So
Right.
so we're going to go through the first four verses of the Kamimanta Sutras. We went through the first four verses of the Yoga Sutras, and now it's the first four verses of the Karma Mimamsa Sutras. So the first verse is Atato Dharma Jignasa. And it's translated as now from here, the desire to know Dharma. So this word Atato means now from here. So the Karma Mimamsa Sutras start from the state of now, which is the end point of the Yoga Sutras, with a desire to know Dharma. So this is like, it's like simple once you get it. It's all it's saying is, Atato means let's start from the end point of the Yoga Sutras and have a desire to know Dharma. And Dharma is the unmanifest action that gives rise to creation. So this is all you really need. From the state of the end point of the Yoga Sutras, just have a desire to know Dharma, the underlying evolutionary force that gives rise to everything. So that Peter Freund, made this point, so I'd add it. When the Kavalia of Patanjali absolute pure singularity, oneness of pure transcendental consciousness has been realized, then begins Karma Mimamsa, the study, realization of the dynamism and mechanics of creation within the
Mm.
So the
Mm.
second verse
Beautiful.
is Chodana Lakshana Artho Dharma. Dharma is an impelling force on an object whose goal is determined by Lakshana. And Lakshana means identifying its essential qualities. Dharma is the force of evolution of an object resulting from the combined tendencies of its attributes or components. And this particular verse was very confused in translating. This is the one that sort of I woke up in the middle of the night and realized all it's really saying is realize that there's a perfect analogy in physics. Dharma is like momentum in physics. All it's really saying is like an object is made up of components, and each component is, say, moving in a different direction. You add up the directions of all the components, the karma, the actions, and you get the total karma of the object, the total direction. So adding up the individual components of motion, like the Dharma, to determine the overall net motion or the karma of the macroscopic object. And large systems, because there's so many properties and components to add up, approximation is used. So that all this means is adding up all the parts to get the whole. And another really clear analogy for me, if one is interested in Jyotish or astrology, it's kind of like if you want to understand someone's life direction, you look at the effect of the 10th house and the effect of Saturn and the effect of Mercury. You find all these different influences, and you add up all those influences to get the total life direction of the person's life. So that's all this is really saying, is just find all the individual influences and you add them all up and you find the net dharma or karma in their life. And dharma is like the word for the overall evolution and the action and activity, like what's coming back to us in our life is just from all these parts. And then the third verse says, so this is a very concrete picture of what it's actually saying. Examination of the means. All this is sort of saying examination, evaluation of all the dharmas, the tendencies of all the different components and their interactions within Jaimini's Kaivalya, means within the silence to determine the overall outcome or resulting action that manifests on the macroscopic level. The point here is that it's so complicated on the surface, there's no way you can figure it out. If you want to look out in the sky and figure out, what all the influences on your life and add them all up, it would be impossible. But if you were to transcend to the level of Jaimini's Kaivalya, which is a state of beyond the senses, the state, that's the only way you could do this. So that's sort of what this saying is. Within that, once we've gotten to that experience of Jaimini's Kaivalya, then we have the ability to know that level of knowledge. So, and from the physics, it's, I'll say, all macroscopic behaviors of objects, such as, the chemical reactivity, the viscosity, the conductivity, etc., are determined by adding up all the microscopic quantum qualities, but there's so many of them, it's impossible really to do that. You can just approximate. So then the fourth verse is this. It says that this process of gaining knowledge is not through the human mind or the sense organs, which are constrained by time and space, but through the experience of Jaimini's Kaivalya, examination of the structures within transcendental consciousness. So that's what this is saying. And then because the course of karma is unfathomable, it says that in the Gita, it's impossible to know the effect of every action that we do on everything. It's outside human capability. The individual mind needs to surrender to cosmic intelligence to do the calculation. And this is the experience of Jaimini's Kaivalya. So I just wanted to say thanks to Carl Herman on Persian, and Dr. Peter Foyn for assisting with the translation, but they like different words. Carl Herman helped and Peter Foyn helped, but I'm not sure if they haven't seen this whole translation, so I don't know what they would think of it. Okay. So that's the first 4 verses of Jaimini's Karmamanta Sutras, and I'm really happy about that, to have found a translation that makes sense, because you start reading through Karmamanta Sutras, anyone ever tried a translation, it completely unclear as to what it is it's talking about.
Right.
Now it seems to be something that makes sense. The meaning of the rest of Jaimini's Karmamanta Sutras is not clear. So what I read indicates it's a debate between Jaimini and others on the validity of Jaimini's Kaivalya. Peter Freund asserts that the Karmamanta is a textbook for realizing God consciousness, assisting those growing in the experience. So I didn't want to get caught trying to defend one point or the other. In any case, is there anything we can do to establish Jaimini's Kaivalya as a living reality in our daily lives? Because that's really what we want. Could reading the Karmamimamsa Sutras in Sanskrit help establish this reality in our life? Because that's what some people believe. They can just learn Sanskrit and read this thing. Certainly, there have been individuals who have developed God consciousness or Jaimini's Kaivalya without learning Sanskrit and reading the Karmamimamsa Sutras, and that's a very, tedious thing. Is there an easier method? Is there a shortcut? Is there another approach? Well, let's look at the first verse of the Karmamimamsa Sutras again. Tato Dharma Jigyasa. And it means, now from here, the desire to know Dharma. So we could interpret that as the Karmamimamsa Sutras start from the state of now, which is the end point of the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali's Kaivalya with a desire to know Dharma. So that seems to be the only 2 prerequisites. There only seem to be 2 prerequisites for developing Jaimini's Kaivalya: to have realized the state of now, which is Patanjali's Kaivalya through meditation and all the 8 limbs of yoga and all that, and to have a desire to know Dharma. So maybe if that's all we need, therefore, for establishing Patanjali's Kaivalya, the state of now, and truly have the desire to know Dharma, the means should appear somehow to support our desire to establish Jaimini's Kaivalya. A teacher should appear, or whatever else we need to realize Jaimini's Kaivalya. Someone may say something to us, and that could trigger some understanding, or we practice yoga nidra, and somehow the knowledge appears out of that. So this may make more sense than thinking we can establish Jaimini's Kaivalya just by reading a book and learning Sanskrit. So next we're going to look at the Brahma Sutras. So that was the summary of the Karmamimamsa Sutras, which was the 5th of the Upangas. Now we're going to look at the last one, the 6th one. So we're getting near the end of this part 2. The last. Can you guess the first word of the Brahma Sutras, also called the Vedanta?
Now? Maybe
Okay.
now?
Yeah. So yeah, the Maharshi said that where yoga ends, Vedanta begins. So you're right. The first word of the Brahma Sutras is a tato, meaning now from here. It's also the first word we just saw of the Karmamimamsa Sutras. So here it is. Now from here, the desire to know Brahma, which is like Brahman consciousness. Now from here, the desire to know Brahman. So the interpretation, we can have the same interpretation as we did from the previous verse. From the state of now, the goal of the Yoga Sutras, Brahman consciousness begins to develop, provided there's truly a desire to know Brahman. So we need.
The last section, we were looking at the desire to be, if we think of Dharma as the desire to be in tune with natural law and to live according to one's highest purpose, we could say expression of the divine. And this one is to actually be in relationship with the divine. Yes?
That sounds great. Yeah. Yeah, this is like Brahman consciousness. And also, yeah, it's like this one is the total state of wholeness, of knowledge, like living reality. The other one's more, but yeah, that's if one has realized Patanjali's Cavalli and has a desire to know Brahman, whatever one needs to develop Brahman consciousness should automatically manifest in one's life.
Wow.
So it seems that Brahma Sutras and Karma Mimamsa Sutras both start from the same place. Now,
Yeah.
Patanjali's Cavalli with the endpoint of Yoga Sutras. Thus, it appears they can develop simultaneously. And I think this,
Mm-hmm.
for me,
Mm-hmm.
helped explain the variety of experiences of people.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause some people
Mm-hmm.
develop Kaivalya first, some people skip it and go to Brahman first, some have God realization first, some
Right.
don't have it until later. So this can help explain the variation in individual experiences. So the next slide, we're going to return to the six Upangas and we'll reflect on revisiting the six Upangas, the role of yoga and nyaya. Yoga for realizing Atta, the state of now. Patanjali's Cavalli seems to be the key of living because once we've realized the state of now, it appears any desire is automatically fulfilled. Because remember this phrase, now from here, the desire to know Dharma gives Dharma, desire to know Brahman gives Brahman, desire to know XYZ should give XYZ. So we just need to be established in Kaivalya, it appears. And chapter 3 of the Yoga Sutras, called the Vibhuti Pada, or chapter, provides guidance on how, from the level of Kaivalya, one can fulfill specific desires or life-supporting intentions, just to sort of verify that or give substance to this concept that all we need is Patanjali's Kaivalya. So what is the value of the first three Upangas if all we need is Patanjali's Kaivalya? What's the value of Nyaya, Visheshka, and Sankhya? Well, the first three Upangas provide us the cognitive tools necessary for functioning in daily life. We need to be able to analyze and perceive and have logic and things. So there is a value to them. Also, it seemed that all six Upangas have their origin in Nyaya. And this is something Maharishi said. The next five Upangas
Right.
originate from the valid means of gaining knowledge described in Nyaya. And this is an insight that came out, so I wanted to add it. So in Nyaya, there's four valid means of gaining knowledge. I'm just going to show now how all the other Upangas come out of Nyaya. Pratyaksha, direct perception, gives rise to Visheshika, which is a second nyaya, because direct perception is what Visheshika is. So out of this requirement of nyaya, of that pratyaksha is one of the means of gaining valid knowledge. So if we can trust Dorothy and she says, I saw something on the street, that's a valid means of gaining knowledge. If Dorothy is, in a clear state of mind, and anumana, inference, is another valid means of gaining knowledge, and
Wait a minute, Richard, just to clarify. So pratyaksha is when it says direct perception, doesn't that mean subjective perception? Like the person perceives it within themselves, right? So it's not like Dorothy's perceiving it for me, but isn't
well,
pratyaksha?
it's kind of like if you were to go to a courtroom and you were to present evidence.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, and you
Okay.
present evidence, and I say,
Okay.
well,
So
like,
direct perception can include objective observation as well as subjective observation.
yeah, this is more like
Okay.
objective observation. It requires the Prediaction is, can we trust Dorothy? It's sort of like direct perception from a witness,
Oh, like an original source, like an
yeah,
original source.
an
Got
expert,
it.
like from
Mhm.
an expert. Anumana is inference, like seeing smoke and then concluding there's fire. And that requires Sankhya to be able to analyze, what you see. Upamana is comparison, which addition to Vaisheshika and Sankhya requires their fine perception of karma mimamsa, to be able to compare different things. Shabda, verbal testimony by reliable experts. it requires both direct pratyaksha, but it requires yoga. So the experts function from the state of now and they're uncluttered by vrittis and kleshas. So these four, um, um, these four, the next four upangas come out of the four valid means of gaining knowledge. And then the last one, Vedanta, comes out of this, the explicit exclusion in the eye of invalid logic knowledge, such as from delusion, dreams. It requires Vedanta because it's the state beyond illusion and delusion. So we know that Dorothy didn't just hallucinate in her
Right.
in her sleep and see a purple cow or something, and
Yeah.
okay. And that thus, as Maharshi once declared, Nyaya appears to be origin of all the Upangas.
Interesting.
I just I wanted to validate that point because Maharshi said it. So just for your information, in case someone looks in the Vedic literature, the Mimamsa Sutras can also be called the Jaimini Sutras or the Purva Mimamsa Sutras. Purva means first or earlier analysis. The Brahma Sutras are also called the Vedanta Sutras or the Uttara Mimamsa Sutras. Uttara means ladder, higher analysis, and Vedanta means end of the Veda, just for the scholars. Now here's this desiring XYZ to get XYZ may seem too simple. Because I made this point because someone said, okay, that's great. I don't need to do anything. All I need to do is desire XYZ and get XYZ. So I'm okay as I am I at, and that's like, a little too simple. Is there more to it? The prerequisites to desiring. We need to first be clear on what we want so nature can respond. And these are points. And we need to ask with love, gratitude, and benevolent intent for all and belief. And we need to believe it's possible. We can't, ask for $1 million for ourselves or, the desire has to be something that's useful for everyone, for get support of nature. And this is an important one, especially for me, realizing that, and now I may be breaking through some people's concepts, but break through subconscious beliefs, limitations, and social programming that is limiting what we believe is possible. Because we all got programming in our mind, and if we believe something isn't really possible, no matter how much we think we're desiring it, it's not gonna work out. And we need to be open to opportunities from unexpected channels. So if we desire something and it comes through some channel we're not expecting or through somebody that we don't, recognize, then we're losing an opportunity. So we need to be discriminative. We can't just believe everything, but we need to be open-minded to new opportunities. And this is I wanted to add, because Maharshi makes it a point like this on a talk. If Christ or a messenger comes to us and we say, I'm sorry, but you are not on my approved list of information sources, we may miss an opportunity. Because I know a lot of people like that. They're caught in their, limited information sources and who they believe is true, and then they miss out on other opportunities. And I just want to add this. I very much appreciate Dorothy's viewers as they realize knowledge does not always need to come from some approved source or come through mainstream media or something. There's alternative sources and I become much more open to that. We need to follow our hearts, not just old patterns, not just follow the crowd. Thinking for ourselves takes courage. It's more challenging, but it's necessary for our growth. We need to have direct connections to the divine. We need to learn to listen to our inner divine and not just, try and look at what other people's doing and, feel we need to be part of fear of people thinking we're unusual if we're not doing what.
Richard, maybe part of that also involves trust in our own individual relationship with the divine.
Yeah,
Some trust. We trust that our connection to the divine is real and that it's beneficent, that it's, here to help.
Yeah, it's like surrender and trust go together. Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that. And then live your truth and let others live theirs. Like, don't mind what they do. Their path is just as valid as ours. We don't need to try to convince them. And we don't be compassionate, loving, but do not compromise yourself. I kind of like that.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And in terms of TM movement, I believe Marshy's passing heralded a new era in the TM movement in which we need to learn to listen and we learn to think for ourselves rather than just being soldiers following orders. And I think that Marshy knew that. So he did what he was supposed to do, and he knew it's our time. And for me, I just want to make this point. I got very sick in India, and it was a huge blessing because before that, I had very deep, dogmas, and this forced me to break free from these deeply set dogmas, beliefs, and patterns because I needed to look at, in order to heal myself, I needed to step out of my comfort zone, my rut. So we all have a stage of doing that. And also do not, let me just move this. For, do not forget the first prerequisite, is to have realized Patanjali's Kaivalya, which also requires or may require changing thinking and behavior patterns that are no longer serving us. The earth is moving into a whole new enlightened era. We were born for this wonderful time. It's time to get ready. We need to let go of the stuff that's no longer serving us. So let's end this section with the first four verses of the Brahma Sutras. You only looked at the first verse. The first four verses of the Brahma Sutras, also called the Vedanta Sutras and the Siras Vyasa or Veda Vyasa. Now from here, the desire to know Brahman. So that's the starting point, the state of now with the desire to know Brahman. And now then a vision of the goal. So it's like management by objectives. We know where we started from, where is it we want to get to. The second verse, Brahman is the source of creation, of maintenance, and evolution, the three gunas. And the third verse, Brahma is the source of the scripture, like of the Rig Veda, its unfoldment in the entire Vedic literature. So this is where we want to get to. So we started from this with the first verse. Now we know where we want to go. How do we get there? So that's the game plan. What's our procedure for getting there? That's what the fourth verse tells us. Tat tu samanyan samanvaya. And Marshy's translated that here that is through unifying nature. In another place in the America chorus, that is through the churning and self-fulfilled consciousness between infinite silence and infinite dynamism. And if you want to understand more of that, that's elaborated in the earlier presentation. That's really what the whole presentation was about. And it's also elaborated in the Yoga Nidra for the pulsation between infinite silence and infinite dynamism. So that's like a shortcut or a mechanism for developing Brahman consciousness. So part 3 is only 3 slides, and this is the last part. There's 3 slides, and I guess and you'll see. So remember this chart from earlier, and I said we get to it and look at it in more detail. So this is reflecting on the 5 ton mantras and the 5 senses and the 5 chakras, relationship between all of these. So we saw this quote before. So now I've highlighted Shabda ton mantra, which is finest hearing. It's related to this element of space. And the kosha anandamaya, the layer of bliss. So here's the quote, and we're going to go through all 5 of them. This one we already saw, but I'm just summarizing again. Shabda guna akash means sound is the quality of space. And this is profound. So, Shabda Tan Mantra, the finest object of the sense of hearing, is the quality or the fundamental building block of space. Motion is inherent in space. And here we have subjectivity creates objectivity. So, we're creating the element of space through our sense, the finest object our built of the sense of hearing is the building block of space. So our subjectivity is creating objectivity. Now let's look at subjectivity creates objectivity, indicates that physical objects are created through the process of observation by the senses. And in physics, this relates to collapse of the wave function. We observe something, we create it. It wasn't manifest until we observe it. Also, the world is as we envision it. If we envision a loving creator and a happy, peaceful, fulfilled world, that is what we get. It's up to us. Use our power of desiring for the good of all. And now we're going to look at the second element, the finest touch and the air element. Sparsha guna touch means finest. Feeling is the building block of air. Sparsha Tan Mantra, the finest object of the sense of touch, is the essential component of air. So this places on reflections. I was trying to understand what this means. So this said to me, this is my interpretation, maybe another one, or Dorothy might. Our atmosphere, which is like the air element, what we feel around us, is built up from the finest feelings of those in our surroundings and of ourselves. So that's our environment. It's not just the air element is just not some passive thing. We only see based on our perceptual mechanism can only see so much, but there's all this finest feelings out there, and we respond to it. We walk into a room and and someone's had a fight. We respond to that, and that's our atmosphere. That's the air. Now we're going to look at the fire element. Finest sight is the building block of the fire element, Rupa Guna Tejas. Rupa Tan Mantra, the finest element of the sense of sight, is the essential component of fire or metabolism. How can we understand that? The power of our vision, which is like Agni or Tejas, the fire element, of our vision, of our metabolism, and our digestion is built up from all that we see and all the radiation and heat in our environment. So our environment influences the fire in our element influences the fire in us, just like when the sun is at the highest point in the sky, the fire element is at the highest. That's when our digestion is strongest. So now let's look at the next element, rasa guna apas. Finest taste is the building block of the water element. And here we've highlighted that again. What could that mean? Rasa tanantra, the finest object of the sense of taste, is the basic component of the flowing energy product, prana, or water element in our environment. And what could that mean? We taste liquids and their solutes, which means the things that are dissolved in. We also taste the energy flowing in the energy channels and nadis in our body using our biochemical, bioelectrochemical, and other taste receptors. So it's sort of like our taste actually creates the water element. And this is one way of, I was trying to understand that. As finest smell is the building block of the earth element. What could that mean? It's sort of like through the sense of smell, the finest object of the sense of smell is we create the earth element. And this is again like subjectivity creates objectivity, which is a reversal from what we're thinking. So physical structure wouldn't be there if it wasn't for our sense of smell. It's sort of interesting. The solid, stable structures in our environment are composed of atoms, molecules, which become airborne and smelled. So if we didn't have our sense of smell, this is a reversal. There wouldn't be an earth element because subjectivity underlies objectivity. According to Sankhya, subjectivity creates objectivity. Separation, and this is the next slide's going to explain this next sentence. separation is a characteristic feature of a waking state of consciousness where we now appear to be separate from our environment. And we're separate from our environment. First comes subjectivity, then comes objectivity. And we'll see that in this next slide. So this is the 25 layers of manifest creation and Sankhya. And note the gap in the relative, or just, this is all things a level of a relative, but there's a gap between the values of mind, intellect, and ego. So we've got like mind, or intellect, ego, mind, and then we've got the 5 sense organs and 5 elements. So there's a big gap. This is what we mean by this. There's a separation. In the relative world, we experience things as separate from ourselves, which makes it challenging to think that subjectivity creates objectivity, because it seems like the object has nothing to do with the subject. In the absolute, pure consciousness, there's only 8 prakriti elements, 8 divided prakriti elements, which correspond with mind, intellect, ego, and the 5 elements: earth, water, air, space, and fire. The senses and organs of action have no place. So we're just kind of like comparing, this is the relative. Now the next chart's gonna be the absolute. But just so you know, this is something I was reflecting on. The 5 koshas being relative levels, oops, I have to go back. The 5 koshas being relative layers correspond with the 5 mahabhutas, the 5 time mantras of Sankhya, mind, intellect, and ego. The koshas can be considered as covering. So the point I make here is, I was trying to think, why are the 5 koshas, so separate from, why are mind, intellect, and ego not included in them? Because they're in the relative, and on the relative level, mind, intellect, and ego are subjective levels, and they're completely different from the objective levels. Whereas if we look at the chakras of the body, which we'll look at in the next chart.
Richard, I have a question about the 5 sense organs. You have them in an order, but you don't have them in the order that you've been consistently putting them in so far. Right. Usually you have hearing first, and then touch, and then sight, and then taste and smell. And I noticed they're not in that order here.
Oh, okay. This is I should have done. I just copied this from the internet. So that's
right. Okay. And also, I can cut out this question. I mean, maybe we don't need me to ask this question in our interview here. But then also my question is about hands, feet, speech, elimination, procreation. Do those correlate in any way with the 5 ton mantras, the 5 mahabhutas, the 5 senses of action at all? Sense organs? So are they in a specific order?
I need to look that up. I think they are, but it's like, so the 5 indriyas and the 5 karmendriyas are the 5 organs of action, the 5 senses of perception. So I think they are, but I don't have that on the tip of my tongue.
Okay, that's okay. That's but okay. I threw that out there because I just kind of was noticing it, but I'll tell Tom we can cut this section. I mean, we can cut where I'm asking you the question, because that's something you probably want to do on your own. You don't need it in the interview, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. But this is, but it's a good point that you made, that these are not in the right order, because I hadn't noticed that. Okay, the 7 or 8, or I say or 8, because I will look on the next chart. Chakras appear to correspond with the 8 unmanifest divided prakriti elements, and to be expression of the unmanifest, even underlying the subtle physical body. The point I'm making here, we'll see in the next chart, is I was trying to understand the difference between the koshas and the chakras. And the koshas only correspond to 5 of the chakras. What about the other 3? And it seemed, and I realized that if we look at the chakras, which we'll do in this next chart, we've got the 8 chakras, and they correspond to earth, water, fire, air, space, mind, intellect, and ego. And they're kind of like all unified, which is like how they are in the unmanifest. And I thought that's really profound. So the eight or the mandalas or the chapters of Rig Veda correspond with these elements too. And in the Rig Veda, there's the first mandala, the first chapter, and the eight divided Prakriti elements, which means earth, water, fire, air, space, mind, intellect, ego, come out of the first mandala. So second, third, fourth, fifth. And they correspond with earth, water, fire, air, space, mind, intellect, ego. And then there's the 10th mandala is Purusha, which is like silence. So the eight divided Prakriti elements have their basis in Para Prakriti, undivided. And then so this is like this, this section is reflection. So this is my reflections. Just as mandalas 2 to 10 of Rig Veda originate from mandala 1 on this left-hand side, could we postulate an eighth chakra, which is like above the head, corresponding to ego, and that all the chakras come out of a zeroth chakra, which we can think as like Gaia or Mother Earth or something below. So this was a postulate, and this is sort of like my feeling, but I can't prove it. And this is one more point, the mathematical relationship of all the mandalas and how the mandalas 2 to 10 emerge from mandala 1. Maharshi talked about this as something that's described in Karma Mimamsa, like the unmanifest, because this is all within the unmanifest. And then the last point, I think it's the last point. It's amazing that the eightfold structure of the chakras appear to express the structure of the unmanifest and the reality of unity consciousness in which subjective and objective values are unified. We don't have all those intermediate, like in Sankhya, we had all those, 5 organs of action, 5 senses of perception, and all that stuff. But here, there is no intermediate. It's all unified in the unmanifest. And then this is, I just want to refer back to this earlier presentation just as a preview and a reminder to people that there's more details that we didn't do in this one. And in this earlier presentation, which then go back and see, Maharshi said that underlying maintaining the entire creation is a continual pulsation between fullness and fullness and fullness of emptiness. And we saw this in the yoga nidra chart, but there's more detail in that presentation. And the 8 limbs of yoga maintain this pulsation, and this is the highest value of the 8 limbs of yoga. And the whole central focus of that presentation was locating the pulsation between fullness, fullness, and fullness of emptiness, and the role of the 8 limbs. And to see that, go to this earlier presentation. So here's a reminder, or all gratitude to Maharshi for sharing with us the complete knowledge of the Vedic tradition. And I think this is the last slide. I wanted to add one Vedic quote. Let me just move it. Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotir gamaya. Mrityarma amritam gamaya. From non-existence lead us to existence. From darkness lead us to light. From death, from mortality, mrityu, lead us to immortality. And this is from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad.
I love how you ended with this quote. It's so simple. And the principle is so universal. As I'm listening from the angle of my clients, right? The people who are subscribed to my channel, who are interested in this knowledge and who are coming from their own unique backgrounds. And I love this last quote so much because the principle is it drives so completely to the heart of the nature of the human condition, to be looking to these universal principles of existence, light, and immortality as the foundation for all healing. Again, it kind of harkens back to the beginning of your presentation that the 3 steps of Yoga Nidra are so simple, and yet they're essentially the foundation for all healing and unfoldment of higher states of consciousness. you've brought it into a light where it does make sense. And it's wonderful to have that. It's groundbreaking, Richard. It's really groundbreaking. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
well,
for adding the depth of your understanding. And what you've done is you've interacted with the knowledge that was in the books, that was kind of stuck in the books, so to say. You've interacted with it on the level of your own consciousness in order to bring out the applied value of that knowledge in a way that makes it relevant and useful to everybody. Like,
well,
how brilliant is that? How wonderful. Thank you.
well,
Thank you. It's beautiful.
well, thank you for allowing me to share this because it's kind of like I just felt like this is coming through me. I'm supposed to be sharing this. I don't know where
Yeah.
it's coming from. It has nothing to do with me in terms of my individuality. And Dorothy is allowing me to share this, like to fulfill this Dharma that's being, something that I'm supposed to do in this lifetime. So now I've done it. We'll put it up and then see what comes next.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
So,
Richard, thank you very much for being here
okay.
today and for all the hours and the deep, deep thought and direct experience that you have applied to this field of incredible knowledge in order to make it available to everyone. I'm so grateful. And I'm sure that the people who have that chance to see this video will be very grateful. So thank you, Richard, for being with us today.